Good. That's great. So, Pranhanda, good afternoon, everyone, to another of our batch seminars. This afternoon, we've got the pleasure of welcoming Professor Scott Orford from Cardiff University. And the title of Scott's talk is Public Map Platform, PMP, Building an Online Mapping Platform for Future Generations. Our next seminar is on I think it's the 15th. So it's always the third Wednesday of the month, but I think we'll get started with, it's the 17th of April next month. But for today, we'll get started with Scott, as he's got lots of things to discuss today. So as I said, colleagues are asked to either put their questions in the chat or unmute themselves at the end of today and ask questions themselves. So without further ado, thank you very much, Scott, for offering this talk, and the mic is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about a project that's been going probably for 6 months. It's a 2-year project, so we're just about to really get our teeth into the nitty-gritty of it. And it's a public map platform project. It's funded by the AHRC, and it's about £4.5 million. And it's a joint project by Cambridge University, Cardiff University, and Wrexham University. And it's part of the HRC's call about the green transition ecosystems. So it's a green transition project, and we're looking at the importance of getting people's and communities' voices heard as part of the green transition. Okay, so the background from this comes from some work that the PI Flora Samuels did about delivering better place outcomes through the use of data. So it's coming out the sort of digital planning, digital transition background. So the sort of framework is around planning, but actually it's moved beyond that now. It's moved beyond. It's much more into public participation. It's much more into collaboration, and it's much more into co-production and co-design. But all this is very important when it comes to collecting and curating data about place, and it's something that's missing from a lot of the planning data and the planning discourse. Okay, so Better Places builds on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and the emphasis on how to modernise digital planning systems, and how mapping and data sharing can help in building better places, and the importance of democratizing mapping and democratizing the data collection and sharing, so it becomes more bottom up rather than top down. So really, this is where the public map platform comes about. It's about democratizing the collection and dissemination and use of data about places. And in this context, it's to do with future generations, which links to things such as climate change and net zero and the just transition. So it feeds into lots of different areas. And so it's come out of work that three of the PIs, Flora is the PI and the two co-Is have worked on. So I'll introduce who's on it in a second. But essentially, if you're thinking about data, particularly in terms of planning and particularly in terms of mapping, there's 3 types of data that have conventionally been used. If you start looking at the bottom of the screen, we kick off with the sort of physical and spatial data, the sort of data you might get from, say, the Ordnance Survey or from Google, which basically tells you where things are. It's the infrastructure. And then the middle bit, this is called passive data. I would call it secondary data. This is a slight sort of disciplinary difference. But this is existing data sets which can be brought in and mapped. So it's the sort of data sets such as the census or the index of water deprivation, the sort of data that Natural Resources Wales collects, It's sort of data that you'll get from the ONS websites or the Welsh Government websites, etc. And it's sort of data that wizard that I work with I've used a lot, and it's quite conventional. It's the top data that we're interested in, which we've called active data. This is data which is co-created by the communities who live in the places that we're interested in. And this is actually data that's quite often missing from planning and missing from these sort of data layers. And actually, this is data that's crucial to understand placemaking, and it's crucial to understand a just transition. It's crucial to understand climate change adaptation, and it's in one sense it's always been missing. And there is a literature on how you can co-create and co-produce data from communities, particularly in the sort of planning discourse, and it's all pre-digital. So what's happened in the last few years? There's been a move to digital. This has really been given a kick with the COVID. So everybody moved online, and a lot of planning consultancy moved online. So what we're looking at is how you can create local data and how you can capture and co-create local data through digital methods as opposed to more conventional methods, although we will be looking at both. That's a bit of background. So it's quite a pragmatic project. It's to bring together a variety of spatial data which already exists, and data that we're going to co-create with local communities, from very fine-grained data relating to individual properties or individual places, through to sort of neighbourhood and local authority. We believe, or the rationale behind this is that voices of diverse communities need to be represented. And one way of getting them represented, and particularly in the planning process, is through maps, because maps are the language of planning. So there's an importance of not just collecting people's voices, but looking at how you can map them so you can talk the language of planning and inform planning decisions. So here's the three of us. So Flora she's the PI from Cambridge. It builds on a lot of work she's done on sort of she's an architect by background. She's the head of architecture in Cambridge, and she's done a lot of work on placemaking and community consultation and social asset mapping. I'm in the middle. I'm from Cardiff University. My background is GIS, modelling, statistical modelling. I work for something called Wizard, which is the Patches, one of the networks, and I do a lot of work on building platforms and dashboards with the Wizard data team. And I've done a lot of work on Welsh data, and I've worked with Flora before on other projects. And on the right, we've got Professor Alex Shepley from Wrexham. He's Professor of Arts and Society. And we're actually mobilising creative practitioners and the arts and humanities approach to community engagement a lot in this project, which is new to me. It's new for me. It's a very big team. We met last month, a 3-day summit in Anglesey. I'm going to see Anglesey in a minute. These are some of the stakeholders. It's not the entire team. A lot of people we couldn't make it. But these are our key external stakeholders. And one big aspect of the project is co-production. And so we're starting to sort of co-create some of the research questions we wanted to answer using the platform. There's quite a few non-academic co-Is being funded from a variety of institutions. Including creative practitioners, the Quality of Life Foundation, who are part of the funders, OpenStreetMap, which I'll talk about in a minute, and then there's collaborators. So there's Anglesey Council I've bought in, Medramon, which is a voluntary organisation on Anglesey, and then there's a variety of other people, including Natural Resources Wales, and the collaborators keep increasing. Actually, it's quite an organic project. And these are a few supporters. Okay, so we're piloting on Anglesey. You might wonder why Anglesey. Partly because Anglesey is under-researched in Wales. You know, you think maybe the Welsh Valleys might have been a good place to do, but the Welsh Valleys have been sort of over-researched. The Isle of Anglesey is sort of describing itself as the energy island, and they have ambitions to be a place where climate change adaptation is piloted. So they want to be really forward-looking in the move to net zero, the move to just transition, and also the Future Generation Act as well. So to actually comply with the Future Generation Act domains and ideas. So and we've also got strong links on the island. So it was a very good pilot case. Not so good if you live in Cardiff and you've got to try to get to Anglesey, but luckily we've now got people involved in Bangor and of course Wrexham as well. And this is a 2-year pilot. Afterwards, we'll get more money to expand it off Anglesey and also look at other parts of Wales. And one of the ambitions is to make a baseline map of Anglesey around the Future Generation Act domains. So there's 7 domains. One issue with this Future Generation Act domains is that the key indicators and the key variables, it's very difficult to get very fine-grained data for it. A lot of the data might only be available at the level of Wales as a whole, or just a local authority. So what we want to do is start looking at how you can mobilize local communities to collect some of this type of data. We're not going to map all of it. It's very much a proof of concept, but we want to show how it can be done within Anglesey. Another reason why it's Anglesey is because of existing links with 2 people that work in the council there, with the children and young people departments. There's Bethan, who works for the Supporting Families department, and there's Kim, who's the Early Years Pathfinder project. And of course, the Future Generations Act is all about the future of young people and children. So one thing we want to do with this project is focus on young people and children and hear their voices, because again, their voices tend to be missing from a lot of decision making and planning, and they're a good way into actually beginning to sort of map the island and begin to understand different communities. So we're working very closely with the Children and Young People Department in Anglesey Council, as well as the Education Department, and we're also we're working alongside the data team there, and we're going to have a couple of people seconded in Anglesey Council who are going to be helping them with some of their mapping data. Okay, so the focus is on young people and children, and we're going to be working within schools initially, schools as gatekeepers to local communities. So a lot of what we're doing is going to be linking to the new curriculum in Wales. We have someone on the team who works in Wizard on Wizard Education, and she's worked with the Welsh Government in designing the climate change part of the curriculum, and she's also interested in children activism. So we're working closely with schools to create teaching packs. Schools and children are going to be our gatekeepers, and they're going to be gatekeepers into their own families and gatekeepers into the local communities where they live, as well as the teachers as well. So they're ways into mapping the island, and we're going to be creating a lot of teaching resources around this sort of community mapping, and hopefully it will come clear that it's not just about geography, environmental issues and heritage and cultural issues. So there's different disciplines that can get actively involved. We've already identified 3 schools who are going to be our sort of who are really keen to be involved, and then there's the schools which we're negotiating with. Hopefully we're going to get into them in end of May and do the last half term with them, and then then work with them in the summer in the school holidays. So we've identified 3 mapping layers that we want to focus on: a social layer, a cultural layer, and an environment layer. And these layers map onto the Future Generation Act domains. Even though we've sort of there's 3 layers that look like they're quite siloed, actually they do overlap as well. But just for the sake of our organisation, we put them into 3. So the social mapping layer is being led by Flora, because she's done a lot of work on already mapping social assets in parts of her work around placemaking. And she's developed an inclusive engagement kit with Quality of Life Foundation. So there's already resources we can use to go into communities and help map. This is a very traditional way of mapping it. This is from 2018, which Flora participated in and led. So this is in, I think it's Reading. So typically a church hall, and teas and coffees, and the local community come in and they have a paper-based map, and they post-it notes and pens and stick, and they sort of annotate the map, and the events recorded. Discussions about what goes to the map are captured, so there's some context to it. And they've got these quite nice little stickers, which are quite interesting. We're going to talk about that towards the end, what we're going to do there. So it's about mapping social value. It's sort of things that don't appear on normal maps. So it's contextualizing the infrastructure, it's contextualizing the assets. It might be also things about how you use the place and how you use the space, and whether you go somewhere because you enjoy it, or whether you avoid somewhere because there's a fear of crime or something. So these are sort of things we're going to start looking into initially with the school, with the children, but then hopefully the children and their local communities. And again, you stick things onto a map, and then these things get digitized. Hopefully, we're going to do something slightly different in our project because we're moving more towards a digital way of doing things. We're also working with something called Free Ice Scream, who have done a lot of social asset mapping, but what they specialize in is actually social network mapping. So it's not just where things are, and it's also about who uses them and how those people are connected to each other, and also to organizations, maybe things such as the Anglesey Council, maybe to the local voluntary groups. And it's trying to understand that sort of network of maps. So when we're talking about mapping, we're not just talking about conventional cartographic mapping here. We're also talking about innovations in social networking mapping. So they've done a lot of work on how different groups and individuals can be mapped using a very simple but sophisticated survey that we filled in. So this network map was created in the Rianfa Summit that we went to, and it took about 5 minutes to create that. So these are all people in the meeting that we all filled in a very quick questionnaire about who we are, who we're connected to, places where we work, and this was generated on the fly. And then there's software which allows you to interrogate it interactively. What they want to do now is link some of these things, these nodes and these links down to real places. So you might be a community group who meet in a church hall, and therefore it'd be good if you can map them onto the church hall. And the idea is that if you lose the church hall, where do you meet? Do your social network collapse? So there's an element of this we're going to investigate on the island, particularly around climate change adaptation. The second layer we're looking at, I'm not going to say much about this because Alec, who's there, that's Professor Alec Shepley, who's the Professor of Arts and Society. He's going to give a talk. You're very lucky. He's going to give another patch talk on this. So there's going to be a very particular focus on deep mapping of places in terms of its culture and heritage. So I said I'm not going to say too much, but we have recruited several creative practitioners, bards and poets, who have a lot of experience of engaging with communities and with people, to make them really deeply think about the place they live in and the environment they live in, and issues such as social exclusion or climate change. And they're going to encourage them to create artistic outputs, which we're going to have to sort of think about how to map. Again, Alec will talk about this. And one of the features is going to be this something called a rural roaming room. So a bit like Antiques Roadshow, we're going to go around the island in the summer. So in the summer holidays when the schools are closed, we'll be working with National Resources Wales and hopefully the National Trust to identify particular locations on particular days where there's events on. And we'll pitch up with something called the rural roaming room, which Alec will tell you about. It's being built at the moment by school kids, where it'll be a sort of pop-up where mapping activities will take place and the bards will be there. And we're calling it voice places. So it's a place where your voice can be heard and your maps can be created. In terms of mapping cultural and qualitative data, and Kirsty's here today, and I'm very pleased that she's here today because she was involved in this. One of the people on the team worked with Kirsty and John Anderson in Cardiff University to create this literary map of Wales. And what this is a series of novels set in Wales where the plot has been mapped for each novel. So each novel's set somewhere in Wales. It's a real place, struck imaginary place, and they follow the characters through. And when they go to an actual place in the novel, it's plotted on the map. So we have got experience of mapping narratives and photos and sound onto cartographic maps of Wales. So, and as I said, the person who designed this is also going to be working on our project, designing a front end for it. So we've already got experience of mapping some more of the sort of cultural type of information. But also, I mean, cartography has always been an art. There's always been pictures and images on maps, and I think we're going to go back to doing something like this. You know, here be dragons, and so some of the cultural stuff might end up illustrating the map around the edge as well, like it has done here, where on the edge of the map you've got text and you've got photos, you've got interactive stuff. So we want the map to be really well designed, which is why we've got quite a few graphic designers involved. So that we're thinking of creative ways of actually adding data to the map. So Alec will talk a lot more about the creative practitioners and what they're doing on the island. And the third layer is environmental. And this is where we're going big on community science. So we've got Simon Lanyon there and Vincent at the bottom from Cardiff. So there's quite a lot of work done in Cardiff and in Wizard on citizen and community science, and we're going to sort of mobilize that to look at environmental mapping on the island, using school kids initially, then hopefully some of their families and friends. And the emphasis is on either very cheap handheld monitoring equipment, or increasingly, Simon's very good at DIY equipment. He can build monitoring equipment from things like Raspberry Pis and things for less than £100. So we're going to get children to build their own monitors and then use them to collect data. There's a few aspects to this. One is inside schools itself. So before the schools close for the summer, when they open in the autumn, we're going to be looking at the school environment. So if you're a school child and you go to school, so 5 days a week, a third of your life is either going to school or in school. So the school environment is very important for you, but there's very little understood. So there's a bit of a gap in the sort of literature on the school environment and children's lives, even though it's very insignificant. So within schools, we're going to start doing some experiments to get children used to using the equipment and building the equipment. It's around thermal comfort and air pollution inside and outside the school, and also biodiversity mapping outside the school and the playground, just to get them to sort of used to using the equipment. Also, it's going to link into the sort of science experiments and things. So we're working with school teachers, and it'll be quite interesting to see how polluted schools are, and add to the schools' woes of concrete and whatever else has gone wrong with schools. We can now add to poor air pollution, poor thermal comfort. And then in the summer, we're going to be then using the equipment they've built and the experience they've done to start doing some environmental mapping of the island. And I've said, Simon's very good at this sort of thing. So this is his bike, and he's strapped some DIY air pollution and air temperature monitors on the back, and he cycles to and from work, and he measures it and then maps it. And the important thing about this is the context and the story it tells. I'll go into that in a minute. We're going to be getting school kids to go around, maybe not cycle, but actually to go around outside of school and start collecting data on air pollution and thermal comfort. And one thing we're focusing on is something called a rural climate walk. So there's something called an urban climate walk, where people go around urban areas and measure the temperatures. And this is very important in terms of climate change, as urban areas are getting hotter, and we know there's sort of inequalities of the sort of urban heat island effects of poorer areas, which might have less vegetation. tend to be hotter than maybe more affluent areas who've got gardens and things. And this is going to be a real issue going forward in terms of climate change adaptation. There's very little work done on rural areas, so this is a novel thing. Sam's done a bit of work. Sam's done a bit of work on this, and there can be quite big differences in temperature and thermal comfort in rural areas, particularly differences between sort of inside villages and outside villages, and even just walking around the countryside. And this might also have effects on things like plants and farm animals. So it's important to understand that. So we're going to be doing some rural climate walks where we're measuring differences in temperature. Someone also pointed out caravans and static parks, and caravans turn into ovens in hot temperatures, and particularly if it's one of those mobile home parks, but it's very difficult to cool. So there are issues which might affect Anglesey because there's a lot of these sort of mobile home parks. The important thing about this, also biodiversity mapping as well. We're working with Natural Resources Wales. They do a lot of this, and they're very happy for us to get involved because we're Rochester Resources. So you can actually map lichens, and lichens tell you a lot about air pollution. So I've done this in Cardiff through the museum. Did something a couple of years ago where between the museum and the main road, it's about 500 meters, and we just mapped the lichens we found on the stones and the walls between that. And it was quite interesting how the number of lichens decreased rapidly as you got towards the main road, because they're very sensitive to air pollution. So again, this is something we could do with the kids. They don't even need sophisticated monitors. They can just map lichens, and there are a lichen guide we can use. So all these sort of things we're going to be doing with the children, collecting biodiversity data as well. And the important thing about all of this is that we tell stories of it. So it's not just collecting numbers and then mapping it. It's actually explaining it. So and the citizen science team we've got involved is very good at contextualizing the data from the citizen science. So the importance of taking photographs, taking recordings, taking all sorts of maybe more qualitative contextual data at the same time you take the reading. And we are creating resources for collecting that. And the final thing I want to say is the whole platform we're building it on. So we're not going to be using old Ordnance Survey data because we want it to be open. And even though as academics we can use Ordnance Survey data under license, the public might find that difficult. So we're not using Google data because that's owned by Google. We're going to use something called OpenStreetMap data. We use OpenStreetMap data in Wizard as a base map for our different dashboards and mapping applications. And it's one of these things. It's a British invention. Should be better known. And it's basically a crowdsourced map base, which has now gone global. It's like the Wikipedia of maps. And anyone can contribute, and the data they contribute becomes free for anyone in the world to use, either for sort of public use, private use, commercial use. This Creative Commons license, and it's been quite disruptive in certain parts of the UK. It's one of the reasons why Ordnance Survey have changed their business model and released some of their legacy data because they realised it was a threat. But it's been extremely important in parts of the world where there's no maps. And this is Rupert. We've brought him on after, since we got the bid. He's working 1 day a week. He's an OpenStreetMap activist. His background's film and art, so he fits in really well with the team. He spends a lot of time in Uganda and Sierra Leone, getting the locals to map their communities for the very first time. It's been a map. And he also maps, he's from Wales, so he also maps places like Merthyr Tydfil as well. So places where you think it's already been mapped, but actually there's other things you can map that might not appear in Ordnance Survey map. So we're going to be using OpenStreetMap and all their free tools and technologies, and that's available. And there's a lot of stuff you can use. So first thing we're going to be doing is having what's called mapathons. We're going to be working with MSpark on the island, and we're going to be hiring about 30 community mappers for about 6 to 8 months who'll be working full time with us. And they're going to basically filling any gaps on the island. So there's something called missing maps. Missing maps tends to be aimed more at sort of the global south. where there literally are missing maps. But there's also missing maps, map base in the UK from OpenStreetMap. So not all of Anglesey has been mapped, for instance. So what we'll be doing is we'll be trying to start using OpenStreetMap tools to start adding the missing buildings and adding the missing parks and things. So there's something called a mapathon. We all get together and we train them how to do it. It's quite straightforward. I've done it myself. I've started to map my local area on OpenStreetMap. And every time you add something, anybody in the world can use your data. And so hopefully Anglesey is going to be very significantly mapped with free mapping data. The other thing you can do, and I've done this, you can download an app onto your phone, and once you've mapped the physical features, you can go out and then add all this contextual information about it. It's a nice map. It's a lovely app, actually. This is me going for a walk with the dog and filling in missing bits of information. And it's asking lots of questions that you won't find on ordnance survey maps. So there's a zebra crossing there. It's asking about tactile pavements. And it also asks a lot about mobility issues. So it does ask about dropped curves and whether there's a central reservation in the middle of the road when crossing, and whether it beeps, and is it and things like that. Things like in the countryside, what style is it? Is it accessible? Can you get through it? Benches, do they have a backrest for sitting on? You won't get a bench on an ordnance survey map. So all this, I've been around and mapped my own place over a couple of weeks, filling all these sort of things in. So we can get the mappers to do this and start really filling in very contextual information about Anglesey. We're also going to create our own surveying tool. So these questions are already built into the OpenStreetMap complete software, but there might be other questions you want. So there's a lot of questions about bus stops, about does it have a timetable, does it have a light, does it have a litter bin? We might want to ask, is it vandalized? Is there drug litter on the floor? Is the light broken? So we can create our own version of Street Complete using these open source mapping tools, these tools which are map enabled, which you can download on your mobile phone. So you can walk around and you can fill in a questionnaire that you've created on the phone, and it will link the grid coordinates of where you are on the timestamp, so you can map it. So we're looking at those sort of things as a sort of community mapping tools. Again, it's free software. And we're also looking at more traditional paper-based approaches. So this is what Flora did in Reading. People annotate a map, but this has got a QR code. So what would happen is you could take this away, you could draw on it and write it and annotate it. Then you take a photograph of it, and then you'd scan the QR code on your phone, and it'll give you a piece of software to upload the photograph, and that will load onto our servers. And the QR code knows exactly where on the island that map is, so we can map it. We can map as an extra layer. So it's a way of try to automate it or digitize more traditional ways of collecting data. And Rupert's done a lot of work in Merthyr Tydfil about about asset mapping around food banks, but also about why people don't use the green space, and that's because the green space is not very nice. It's full of drug litter. It's full of broken glass. There's gangs hanging around, and he trained the local people to use these open source tools on their phone to go around and rapidly start mapping the area with all this sort of contextual information, and then created interesting maps. So community asset maps, foraging exercise, all sorts of things that you can create on a cartographic looking map, which looks like something the council's created, but they haven't. It's the community have created it using free tools and their own sort of mobile phone equipment. So we're going to be sort of use as much as possible using this sort of DIY crowdsourced practitioner community science type of approaches to collecting the data. Okay, so we've recruited a lot of people. We're about to recruit the the mappers in the next couple of months, hopefully to go into the schools by the end of May. We're busy creating the data collection platforms using OpenStreetMap technology. So the idea is that the data that will be collected will go onto a private platform where only the people that collect the data and the team can see. That means we can curate the data. We realize that there's opportunities for trolls and things to put things we might not want to appear on a map. So we'll be curating the data, and then we'll be building this bespoke public mapping platform, and then we'll be moving the data off this sort of collection map onto the actual public-facing map. And the public-facing map will also contain the secondary data and everything like that. We're also going to do something interesting with science symbology and the ways you display the data. We're going to get the children to create their own map symbols, and those symbols might be animated and might have sound attached to it and things like that. So we're going to make the map really well designed, and it's going to go beyond the sort of static map that you might get from Google. Okay, thank you. So actually, it wasn't as long as I thought it was going to be. So I'll stop sharing.
That's great. I'm kind of sorry that it's not as long. I was enjoying that. Thank you so much. It's really exciting, really exciting. I've got some questions written down, but I'll open the floor to others. I'm sure there will be other questions. Colleagues, any questions? Scott, thank you so much for that really exciting presentation. Amy?
Yeah, thank you. I found that so interesting. With the OpenStreetMap data, is the stuff that's already on there tend to be more kind of objective things, like there's a bench here, there's a bus stop here, or does that also contain the more subjective things? So like when it said, oh, this is a place I feel happy, I feel calm, I feel these different things, is that already on there? Is that stuff that you have to add yourself?
Okay, so there's two things. One is adding to the OpenStreetMap base, right? And that's heavily curated, so you can only add certain things. There's a long list of things you can add, but it tends to be physical things in the environment, physical things. But it goes beyond what Ordnance Survey would collect. So it does collect a lot of things about tactile pavements and things like that, and where the park benches are and things. I think they've talked a lot to older people organizations, because there seems to be a lot about mobility and maybe they're sort of forward thinking. So there'll be a lot. So in terms of the mapathons, it's getting that level of information down onto the base map, and then anyone in the world can use that. The other stuff, the more subjective stuff, we'll be collecting using these other types of surveys, the COBO survey. That won't go. There'll be OpenStreetMap will be a base, but it won't go onto their database.
Okay.
So there's two sets of data which will go onto the OpenStreetMap database, which we'll pull back in, and then data which is just for our project, just for our platform, and that will appear on top of, and we'll pull in the OpenStreetMap base into the map, and it will sit on top of it. But that'll be our data.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any experience of trying to publish this kind of mapping in like academic journals? Is this quite a new method, or is this something that people have published on a lot?
There is quite a bit of work around sort of community mapping. Some of it is using traditional or conventional tools, but they don't work because the tools are really used for sort of top-down mapping. They're not really used for. So there's a whole thing about how you use conventional tools, and there's that literature. There's literature on community mapping, which is sort of Flora's been involved with, but that tends to be more hand-drawn stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And there is stuff on OpenStreetMap, but that tends to be in places in the global south where there is no map base. And it's about how creating a map base can then challenge some of the, can be used. So there's a lot of stuff in disaster and recovery. So when there's been an earthquake, quite often the mappers will go in very quickly and map the area for the response team. So it might take 3 or 4 days. So there's been work on that, literature on how you create maps in an emergency to help with the recovery and the rebuilding. There hasn't really been much work done on mapping in existing communities like this, and particularly across strands. So there's been mapping done in like Merthyr Tydfil, for instance, which is deprived community, but there's not been stuff maybe done in mixed communities or maybe more affluent communities. So it is a slight departure. We will be adding to the literature on that.
You know, I think it's super interesting. I'm interested in kind of which places and which environments support different aspects of well-being. So as you were speaking, I just thought, oh, this is something that I would be interested to explore in relation to that side of my work.
Well, hopefully we're going to sort of co-produce what gets mapped. So we've got some idea. We know it has to sort of map onto the domains of the future generations, but they're quite broad. So hopefully it's going to be sort of very grassroots. Hopefully it's going to be useful as well. There's always a danger it won't be, but yeah, I'm sure it will be, because we'll have some sort of, we'll work with them to make sure the data they collect is useful for as many people as possible.
Great, thank you.
Kirsty?
Yeah, thanks for really helpful, really interesting presentation, Scott. Yeah, it's nice to see the literary atlas there. Actually, another one you could do up in that area would be the half-life of snails, which is I'm reading at the moment, which is about oilvar bee, and it kind of links to my question. So on deep maps, actually, I just want to say to Amy, I mean, there is literature on deep mapping as well, which is obviously quite complex and quite varied, and but there is that kind of analysis of the concept that was developed, have been developed by different thinkers in different places now. So my question, Scott, is how is this going to be used potentially? You know, earlier on you mentioned that you've got partners in the council, and you know, there are clearly kind of planning issues here, and I just wondered how the people involved, the communities involved, might see their work having an impact or not. I mean, I can see lots of potential, but also I wondered if you thought there were any risks around this kind of democratization of mapping, and what it might be used for ultimately.
Yeah. So the first question, there is a strand of work in the project of creating layers from the data, which could be then used in planning. So it's translation. There's a lot of sort of translation work, how you translate the data, the variety of data collected by communities, into something which planners could use. I think there's also an idea that planners might have to change some of the ways they work as well to work with the data. You know, if they're really they want to work with local community and local community data, they have to realize it might be different sort of data than they're used to. So it's but this is part of the sort of digital transition, and we're working with the DLUC, the Department of Levelling Up, is involved as stakeholders, and they're at the moment doing commissioning something called Prop Tech, which is looking at this sort of technology for councils to collect data. So they're very interested in this because it's missing. This has always been a missing element. But you're right, is you collect the data, but how do they use it, and how do they trust the quality and things like that? So that's part that we're working through. And secondly, yeah, there's always a danger that making things visible when you map. There's a literature on that about particularly because working with children, we've had to be so careful with ethics. Because what we don't want them to do is sort of map where they play or where they hide, and then make that in the public domain, because that might be a safeguarding issue. So we're having to be very careful of curating the data so it's non-identifiable. And so there's a trade-off between actually making a map which is useful, informative, but is ethically sound and doesn't transgress some of the safeguarding issues that you will with young people, or not just young people, any sort of vulnerable group as well, so there might be issues about, this is where we take drugs. It's like, okay, do we tell the police? The police already know. And it's always the issue with this sort of almost ethnographic research, but also what happens when you don't tend to make the ethnographic research as public as we're going to. So we have lots of ethical debates about this. I assume it's just going to be curated out. which like misses the point, but it's that balance, you know. And unlike the novels, they're real. So, you know, the novels is fine. You can talk about, you know, map the novels, but some things we might not be able to map.
Yeah, actually, that wasn't even a danger I was thinking of. I was also thinking about the fact that, you know, if you've you identify places that matter to people, kind of linking with Amy's point about well-being, and what value does that ultimately hold in a planning process, for example? You know, they kind of, I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it at all, but it does kind of raise the stakes. It makes some things more visible, more valued. And, you know, we've seen all sorts of examples of planning not really taking or not being able to take those things into account. So I'm just wondering about kind of a little bit further down what you think, maybe that's one of the questions, you know, what you think will change as a result of these.
Yeah, and I think this is sort of phase 2 of the research. After the 2 years, we're putting for new funding, and it will be those sort of questions. Here's the data now. How does that impact planning and decision making, or impact other people's understanding of the island? And can it be used to help climate change adaptation, all the things they want to do, or what are the risks? So I think that's also moving forward into a second phase. But you're right. They're big questions.
Any other questions? I think I may get to ask my own. I was thinking about the what we call impact. So because getting a council involved is important, but it doesn't mean that they'll do so. I guess there's no commitment. This isn't my question, but since we're at it, there's no commitment from the council to do anything with the findings of the project then.
No, I mean, well, they've got no resource. That's the first thing. They've got no resources, so they're only going to get involved if they benefit from it. That's the first thing. So they want to do something with it. You know, there's that sort of commitment, but there's no sort of written commitment yet. I think they want to see what comes out of it. So yeah, so we do actually have a researcher who's about impact. They're going to be working throughout the project. So the other impact is when the community mappers will be working for 8 months collecting the data and working in teams and working about climate change. How does that affect their understanding of climate change and their understanding of the island? So the actual process of mapping itself, you create the map, but the actual process can change people's understanding. Which can then lead to behavioural change. So what we're going to be doing as well is we're going to be getting the mappers to reflect on regular occasions on what they've learned, not about mapping itself, but about the island and about what they're studying. Because the whole part of the ethos of the OpenStreetMap is it's about mapping as a practice and situated knowledges, and how empowering that is. So it's not just about the map itself, it's the process of doing it. So we're going to try and capture that. And that as a resource, and that's a way of understanding place and space.
That sounds great. My proper question is, have you considered within this all this kind of rationale, what's the place? Is there a place for the Welsh language in all of that? Yes.
I think Tora, are you on the call? There, Tora's there. Tora's joined us in the team, and she's going to be sort of overseeing the Welsh language element. Tora, do you want to know more about this? Do you want to say something?
We can't hear you.
I don't feel you're on mute either.
No.
No.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
I never know which microphone to choose. It's technology. Anyway, yeah. So I've been sort of co-opted to this project to look at basically discourse in general. So a lot of discourse or language data will be collected in some way or other, or is a sort of byproduct of what's going on in the various layers. In addition to that, we'll also go out and actually talk to people and collect data through interviews and in focus groups and so on. Looking specifically at the role of the Welsh language in that context is a specific aim of that, and it's a point I've made in this big meeting in Rhianfa, that Welsh is more than just another medium and more than just a need to translate things or have translation available. It's rather something that motivates people to engage. It's something that expresses identity. It's intricately connected with people's experience of their environment and their place. It can't be disconnected from it. So I think this project offers great opportunities to get a deeper understanding of these interrelationships in that respect as well. And I have got a PhD student who is already working in that sort of space, and she's also become part of the PMP on that basis. So there will be lots of things coming out of that. So thanks for asking the question. Brilliant.
Thank you. I think there's something from Kirsty. Kirsty, would you like to unmute yourself?
Sorry, I thought there probably wouldn't be time. I just leave it there. I'm just wondering about historical maps. When is it kind of partly arising from interest in the way that people see land use? You know, they're kind of more rural areas. Their kind of idea. Well, it's always been like this. Well, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it wasn't. 100 years ago, it definitely wasn't. So I just wondered whether the past and maybe the future has a place in your maps. What are you doing with time when it comes to mapping this place?
Yeah, so I think it's been work on the island to do with field place names and things like that. So we'll be mapping as many historical maps as possible. And Rupert's done a lot of work with Welsh farmers on their heritage, on their walls and their barns and the names of their fields. So he's created maps of those. So we are interested in that, and that's part of the cultural strand. In terms of time, it's interesting. Free Ice Cream have looking at ways of visualizing change over time. So for instance, our rural walking, when we walk around the landscape and measure it, we could perhaps on the map actually it might be a day, but we can actually show a time across the day on the map somehow using animation or whatever. But in terms of going forward or backwards, there's also Anglesey did. I think the Older People's Department commissioned some oral history with some of their older people with dementia, and those sound files might be available as well. So that'd be oral history as well involved in some of this. But yeah, it's trying to capture. You're right about the sort of deep mapping and this thing to history and heritage, and how climate change. People do one thing we're hoping to get out of it when we're talking to people, and we're going to be talking to particular groups such as people who own allotments and have owned allotments for years. They might go, the growing season's been pushed forward and back, and the trees are blossoming in 2 weeks earlier than they used to, and all that tacit knowledge about capturing the impacts of climate change. So there will be some of that. Now that'll come out the cultural strand, which Alex is going to be talking about in more detail.
Thank you.
That's great. Any other questions? We've got 2 minutes.
Just a comment. I think this project is so big and has so many opportunities that I believe that if anybody wants to get involved in some way through collaboration or team working, just get in touch. There will be lots and lots of data and ways of getting involved. And I'm not saying there's money in the pot necessarily, but that's a different matter. So sometimes it's just fun to get involved and work on data that are already being collected or use these pathways. So I think there. Am I misspeaking, Scott? Do you think it's okay to get people on board?
Yeah. I mean, as you say, there's going to be lots of data which we won't be able to all analyze. So there's also phase 2. So, you know, if you've got some good ideas, you can build into funding for phase 2. And because it's some of the work's good, well, the work's co-created, there might be ways of shaping the sort of data we collect even now. If you've got a really good thing is saying we should collect this, really, it's very important. We could perhaps factor that into some of the data collection exercises.
That's great. Yeah, there's also the difficulty that it's up north. So yeah, that may be a bit of a hurdle for some of us, but it's really exciting and well done. And yeah, one of my questions was, this is a pilot, what's next? But you seem to have just towards that.
Hopefully it'll emerge organically. I mean, there's already a few things we've sort of said we can't do it now, there's doing too much, but we can sort of think about that as sort of phase 2 and build links to it in phase 1.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting. So thank you very much for sharing that presentation, and really looking forward to Alex's presentation next month now. So thank you very much, everyone. And yeah, we'll make this recording available to all Patch members, and hopefully at some point via the website itself. But thank you very much, Scott and Pobluk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stop.